Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to the work session of the Talbot County Board of Education. We're here at TCEC. It is January 13th, a little after 5:30. As you can see, we have a quorum present, so we're going to go ahead and get started um, with the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, do I have a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
I make a motion to approve tonight's agenda.
I'll second it.
All those in favor? Any opposed? All right. Do I have a motion to approve our work session minutes from December 16th, 2024?
I make a motion to approve the work session minutes from December 16th.
Second.
All those in favor? Any opposed? All right. Moving right along to our topics of discussion tonight, we're going to start with an academic data summary review with Dr. Einhorn, Mrs. Spurrier, and Mr. Neild. I don't know who wants to kick it off. All right, so we'll go to budget first and then come back to data. We have our FY26 budget presentation led by Mrs. Jones.
That probably, thanks. Good evening, hello. Right, we'll go right into it. So, we are at the January 13th board meeting work session. So we're going through the budget for the first time tonight. We are going to go through a summarized version on Wednesday night. And maybe answer questions that I don't have answers for you tonight. I can come back and get those answers for you by Wednesday. And then sometime next week, I expect to get our actual revenue projections from MSDE. They take all the legislative formulas for all of our different programs and give us the official allocations to each district. So I have a pretty good idea, I believe, of what our revenue is currently. And that's what's in the budget book now, but I don't have a good feel yet for the breakout between state and local. And so we'll get those sometime next week and then we'll reconvene. And we do have a joint board meeting coming up on the 22nd. So perhaps by that meeting, I'd be able to give that to you. The county council will be very interested to know what that breakout is because that specifies how much they need to be participating. And then it goes on for the rest of the spring. We will vote on this at the February 19th meeting. Immediately prior to that, we'll have another work session and a public budget hearing. As per usual, we looked at different, got our data from various sources. The community survey data is really the survey data from last year. We did not independently poll again this year. I think we talked about that at our last meeting. We just thought about, who our student enrollments are. That drives our revenue, but it also drives the needs of our students. The requirements of the blueprint, they're being refined as we speak. I mean, we have known what those programs are for a long time, but there are little nuances that we're trying to work through on the daily. And what we're going to be talking about later tonight, our student performance data, is going to help us focus our budget dollars as well. Our priorities for the board have continued to be academic equity and achievement, providing environment for both our staff and our students that is conducive to learning, promoting and retaining our staff through recruiting the right staff and providing meaningful professional development to help retain them and providing them the resources they need so that they want to stay, and of course meeting blueprint objectives.
Sarah, can I ask before you go any further, Was there any information out of the AIB meeting last Friday in regards to funding of the blueprint? Because we had heard some things. The governor may be changing the funding for the blueprint. So I'm just wondering if this impacted the budget process.
What they announced at the AIB meeting was that they were going to push back, put a pause on the collaborative planning portion of the blueprint. So, what that actually looks like logistically, that hasn't come out. They just kind of moved that they will, and the AIB was able to do that without it going to legislation. So, they were able to decide, it's a lot. There's a teacher shortage. They gave a lot of reasons why, talked about evidence, and decided that small portion of the blueprint they were going to push back or pause. Now, that did have a price tag to it, so we have to decide what does that mean for us. And they also talked about the fact that that's just an example of how they heard concerns. They brought it to AIB. They've made some changes as an example of that they're not just steamrolling ahead with everything that's in the blueprint. So they use that as an example.
And then to piggyback on that, there's really only one area where I've cut back on our funding. I did not cut back our funding in anticipation of what the dollar amount might be that they might withhold from us related to delaying the teaching and learning time. So I just kind of need to wait and see. I mean, I could do a lot of guessing and speculating. There's one area where I did do a little bit of hedging our bets on the conservative side. So, I don't think we'll know any of that till April or May. But as if certain pieces of legislation gather steam and seem to gather support and seem likely, then I think we will work behind the scenes to figure out, well, how will we address this if this comes to fruition? If we're going to lose this, we'll come up with some plans. This is just sort of a repetitive slide. I meant to delete those. Okay, so just really quickly, here's an overview. And far right column, you can see there's a $8.6, $8.7 million increase year over year. So the FY26 requested budget in the second to left column. Let me see if I'm not doing that right. Is it? Thank you. Is it the yellow? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So this column is our budget request for the year. I don't have this breaking out revenue wise between state and local. That's going to be coming later. But we're going to be talking through these major increases, but just to give you a very broad overview, there is a placeholder in our budget for increased compensation for our staff. And I don't think it's appropriate to talk about it in open session, exactly what those details are, but there is a placeholder in there for an increase for our staff. Also, there are the new positions that we shared last Friday. So those positions are all factored into salaries and wages, and that's what's driving that big increase. Contracted services is a couple of things. Part of it is software and curriculum. For those of you who are newer to the school board, we've benefited from the last several years from ESSER funding, federal funding, COVID relief funding. We've got, millions upon millions of dollars, and we use that to make some great improvements, hire some great staff. But as that funding ran out last year, some of those programs have ongoing cost. And so some of those are reflected in our, and you'll see here tonight a few times, the funding for this ran out. And what I'm talking about is generally the federal COVID funding.
Ms. Jones, can I pause really fast? I missed what happened on Friday. What you said, the positions that we spoke about last Friday.
No, it was part of the attachments that were sent out, I think, on Friday.
Got it.
New
Okay.
Positions.
Okay.
Yeah. So those are the biggest changes. And then other charges, which is number 4. The majority of those charges are fixed charges, which are benefits in plain private world speak. And you'll see, I think 2.2 of that $2.3 million increase there is changes in health insurance cost, anticipating a 5 to 7% increase in health insurance, health insurance and benefits for the new positions, and just all the related cost of employees. They just are growing at a fast pace, and we don't have a lot of control over that. Well, I mean, we do and we don't. We certainly work with the ESMIC Health Alliance to work on those costs, and we'll get into that a little more later. So that's that. So I thought we would start the evening off talking about new positions. I see the one piece of paper I didn't bring was my big giant workbook with all the justifications of all of these. I don't know if you want to, yeah, Sharon, thank you so much. I can go through these and give you a really brief overview on some of them, or perhaps you have specific questions you'd like to talk about. Let me just do a really quick overview on a few of these. What we provided in your packets on Friday were data to support the reasons for why we feel we need these positions. And this list is whittled down, if you can believe it, from a longer list of wants and desires. And it was very much informed by school administration. This is what they felt they needed in their buildings, and this is what the folks here in this building also feel we need. So
Ms. Jones, I'm sorry to stop you again. I thought it might just be me missing in my email. It doesn't seem like any of the board members got the packet that you're referring to. So attached to the agenda. Thank you very much. I missed that. It seems like everybody else missed that. Okay. Okay. I just want to make sure we're all speaking from the same page in the same document. So that is from Faith on Friday.
So maybe what I'll do, there's a lot of information to digest there, and I'm sorry that you guys haven't had a chance to review that. So perhaps what I'll do is give a very brief overview and let you have time between now and the board meeting to look at them a little more closely, and then we could respond to specific questions on Wednesday more. Does that sound
Great.
good? Okay, good. So the first position is a federal title grant. So Title I, Title II, Title III, Title IV. Those, particularly Title I, require a lot of supervision and specialized knowledge. And we've handled that by sort of divvying those responsibilities out among curriculum supervisors who have many other responsibilities. But there are a few, particularly Title I, that require, it's preventing those curriculum supervisors from doing what they're being charged to do, which is to go out into schools to work directly with teachers and staff to make sure curriculum is being implemented and in the right ways. So we'd like to sort of take that responsibility for some of them off their plate and put that concentrated into one position. And there's some benefits of doing that. And that actually is one of the observations that the strategic planners have made as well. At Easton Middle School, we're struggling to provide all of the related arts classes that we need to provide. We're supposed to provide, I think, 5 different possible pathways for arts. We're not able to do that. We don't currently offer dance. And just the number of arts teachers we have makes it very limited as to the number of art classes a student can take. They can't really concentrate and progress as MSD would like us and COMAR would like them to be able to do. So for scheduling purposes and to provide more opportunities for our students, we'd like to add a teacher there.
Quickly, sorry, personal interest of mine. We don't currently offer dance at Easton High School or St. Michael's High School either. Is that in here or is that?
You'll see when we get into the budget, we have a contracted position for that, a contracted position to sort of get our toes wet, if you will. We've done that in the past down in St. Michael's. We've had worked with one of our staff members after school, I believe, to provide dance, and many students partook of that. That individual is not offering. We don't have that opportunity right now, so we would like to contract with someone to kind of get into that, because there are other related, there's space concerns, there's equipment concerns, things like that, and we just aren't set up for that just yet. So we thought we would start with contracting that on a
Contracted as a
limited
class
basis.
or contracted as a club?
Ideally, we'd like to do it as a class during the day, but it would also depend on who we were able to get for the position and also student interest.
Thank you.
Easton Middle School is doing some different scheduling this year to allow them to spend more time doing these multi-tiered supports and doing more interventions with students. So you're going to see a number of requests for Easton Middle School, one of which is a teacher to help with exploring careers classes. And that would provide additional support for providing interventions for math in particular, as well as ELA. You'll see there's also a math coach being requested, and that would be supporting at the middle school level, primarily Easton Middle School, but also St. Michael's. We have a reading interventionist that would both be working with teachers as well as with students. And there's a lot of data in the document we provided about the number of students getting Tier 3 interventions. So we'd like to cover more there. We are requesting one special ed teacher for Easton Middle School. Right now, those interventions are being provided by instructional assistants, and we'd like to shift that to a special ed teacher. We'd like to add one special ed. I think these are in order. I think I put what's on the slide in order of what I'm reading from, so I hope I have. We've also wanted one general instructional assistant at Easton High School. As well as 4 special ed instructional assistants at Easton Elementary School. We have some students there. Those are our self-contained classrooms. They're all at Easton Elementary School. But we also need, we're shifting to try to do as much inclusion as possible. And so we'd like some additional instructional assistants to make it possible for those students to be more in general ed settings. The next position is ESOL. There are a number of ESOL related positions. I think I mentioned to you when we talked in December that one of our areas of challenge from a funding standpoint and meeting being compliant with what we're supposed to be doing with our blueprint funding is we're getting a lot of funding for ESOL students and we have a high ESOL need. And we'd like to devote more resources there to help meet that need, I guess is really the way to put that. So one of the things we are seeing is we really would need some ESOL support when we first get those kids, when we first get our pre-K kids. So we'd like to have a dedicated ESOL teacher at Easton Elementary School where our highest percentage of ESOL students reside, and then have another ESOL pre-K teacher that would spend time among the other 4 elementary school pre-K classes. Along with that, we'd like to have an ESOL elementary coach to work with and support our ESOL teachers to help them with best practices in EL instruction and hopefully impact some positive outcomes for EL language and academic achievement. And we'd like to do that at the elementary and secondary levels. We would like to add an ESOL teacher to Easton Middle School who would spend some time at St. Michael's Middle High as well. Our MCAP data, as you're going to probably see in just a bit, demonstrates that we do consistently underserve our multilingual students. And so we just need to provide more resources there. And that would be one way to do that. Additionally, we would like to add some ESOL IAs, instructional assistants at both Easton High School and at Easton Middle School. Finally, we would like to put in, I guess I need to advance this slide. Okay. Then we would like to, we've contracted for athletic trainers for several years. It has not gone smoothly for several years. And Dr. Horsey feels strongly that we need the expertise of an athletic trainer available to us and to our students um, by being a full-time staff member. And there's a lot of data to support why we need that. I mean, there's for the safety of our students, we would like to do that. We'd also, in the past, we've tried to add a secondary trainer through our contractor. There's a real shortage on athletic trainers, actually. They're very difficult to come by. So what we thought we would do is we would put one in the budget, and we'd put some hours, some time in for sort of a part-time athletic trainer to support where, I don't want to say one is allocated to one school and one is allocated to the other, but to fill in where our staff athletic trainer, if there's events on the same night, if whatever, it would to supplement, but to have one on staff would be really key. And that's sort of the trend that we're seeing among other LEAs. Then we would like to have a certification specialist in human resources. And that person, we process about 100 annual renewals and certifications for all newly hired teachers every year. With recent changes in the law, I think a lot of ESOL, special ed, early childhood and elementary teachers are going to have to be certified in science of reading. It's a lot to keep track of, and it's more than our current HR staff can handle. So we'd like to add someone to handle that, as well as help track the NBC teachers, just have a little more resources in our HR department. And again, that was a recommendation that's consistent with the findings of our strategic planning consultants. So you're going to see a couple of these next positions. We have, over the past 5 years, brought a number of social workers into the system. And pretty much initially they were all hired through grant money, and then the grant money ran out. And so every year we add one or two to our local budget. So we're down to our final 2 social workers that are on grants that have expired. And we would like to bring them on to our local payroll because they do amazing work in working with our students and identifying problems and root causes and helping them navigate to find the resources they need so that they can be ready at school to learn and not focused on other issues going on in their lives. They work with them on attendance. They have they perform a lot of duties. They help with homelessness, a lot of different things. So you're going to see there's a social worker at St. Michael's Elementary. That was a grant that is expiring from the health department. And then a community school coordinator, that is for Tillman Elementary. We have currently in 2025 2 community schools at Easton Elementary School and Easton Middle School. And next year, we talked about this in December, we have 3 new schools coming online as community schools: White Marsh, Easton High, and Tillman. And so at a minimum, that funding is very directed and you have to do certain things with it. So at a minimum, you have to hire a community school director. So you're going to see three of our requested positions are for this community school coordinator. And that is a requirement of getting that funding. But also it's enough money to cover for nursing care. And in the most situations, we don't need the funding for nursing care because the health department provides nurses for us. But we are going to pick up and pay, we'd like to pay the health department for some additional nursing. And we can get into that a little bit later. But we also have some available funding so that we could use community schools fundings to pay for a social worker. So at Tillman Elementary, they currently have a part-time social worker they share with Chapel. What we'd like to do is make that and that was through a grant, which has now expired. So what we'd like to do is bring that person on board and use community school funding to pay for that position at Chapel, and then add a social worker at Chapel as well. So I think that covers all of those positions. In our finance office, there are 8 people who sit in there. One of them is really sort of a data specialist who really works on with all our financial data, more of an IT person. But of the remaining 7 of us, 3.25 of the 7 of us, I guess really 8 of us, are paid for by grants or by the food service fund or some other way. So we only have, for roughly $85 million, we have 4 people that are on the payroll for finance, which is a lot. We only pay for 1 payroll person in our local budget. And a couple years ago, about 4 years ago, we added a second payroll person. I don't know how we were getting by with 1. It was a recipe for disaster. And I'm really pleased that we have a second one, because it takes them every bit of every 2 weeks to process payroll. So one of those is being paid for by a grant, and I would like to get that person on our local payroll because she's part of what makes it all happen. The supervisor of school counseling. Ms. Spurrier has requested this position because essentially she oversees about 20 programs, and school counseling is one of 20 things she does in a day. And it's the emergencies and the high risk, high priority things that sometimes eat up a lot of her time. And she feels like the school counselors are not getting the benefit of the mentoring and supervision that she thinks they deserve and would help them be more effective school counselors. So we're requesting that position. Student services worker, sort of in the same vein, we have a position that is expiring that is in the MD Aware grant. We've had that grant for 5 years. 5 years? Yeah. So this is our final year of that, and we've used that grant to do a lot of things around homelessness, attendance, helping families navigate, in those situations, the services they need, again, so that students can show up to school and be ready to learn and not focused on other issues. So we're calling that position a family navigator, and that person would be focused at Easton Middle School. And that person would sort of do the work at Easton Middle School along with a student services worker who would sort of serve the rest of the schools in the county, if that makes sense. They'd kind of work hand in hand. Easton Middle School, one of their issues that was identified was absenteeism. And so this person would be working on absenteeism particular to Easton Middle School. And then the student services worker right above that would be working on that, but also on attendance, but also just do intense case management and help us move some of the concerns of McKinney-Vento, which is becoming, we have a lot of McKinney-Vento or homeless students, and would help manage that population and assist them. And finally, let's see, last couple ones, we have a special education facilitator / assistant principal. That's sort of a newly conceived position, so I wasn't quite sure exactly where it fell, but the gist of that is that we have a very high number of IEP meetings at Easton Elementary School because, again, it is the school where we have pre-K or our P3 classes, which are primarily special ed or have special ed needs, but it's where we have all our self-contained classrooms. So we have a pretty high proportion of special ed students at Easton Elementary, and for an administrator, from an administrative standpoint, to attend all those IEP meetings and then draft the plans and work with the people on that, it's a big burden, and they need some additional support. And some bus assistants. Mr. Schaefer has requested a few additional bus assistants. We have bus assistants on all of our classes, on all of our buses where we have handicapped students, but we also have them on our buses because some of our buses are very crowded, and they just help with discipline and maintaining a positive atmosphere on the bus. And so we've consolidated routes over the last couple years since COVID, and so our buses are a little bit more crowded, and he felt like a few extra bus assistants would be beneficial. So that's the list. If you have specific questions at this time, probably the folks in this room could answer them, or we can talk about them Wednesday night too.
I
This
just have
looks
a
like
quick
a great
question. Do the
list.
changes in the law, do that deter people from applying for some of these positions? And then secondly, with that in mind, or do you guys even know if colleges are prepping future student teachers with these certifications that they need?
I'm not sure I understand your first question about deterring people.
You have to have a lot of these new certifications that I was reading.
Yeah.
I can't remember what
Yeah.
position, but
And I think we
towards the
see
end.
that as a problem in the instructional assistant realm because some of our instructional assistants have associate's degrees. Some have, full 4-year degrees. Some have high school degrees. We have different level of education. They all have passed what's called at least a parapro or have an associate's certification. But the ones working with early childhood and ESOL and all that, yeah, they're going to need these additional certifications. And it is problematic because how are they getting the training? How are they sitting? Yeah, it is problematic. And it's something like our groups that we belong to have been advocating, weighing in, trying to educate at the sounds like a great idea because you want the best working with your kids, but that it creates roadblocks too.
So that's why I was just curious. I didn't know um, if we have like a connection with, for example, Salisbury State with future teachers. Are they prepping them for and training them with these certifications to come here and work?
I thought Chesapeake, we were working with I mean, I know we're in conversations with Chesapeake especially, but Dr. Einhorn?
Yes, we currently work with Salisbury Universities, particularly on the Easton Elementary School as a PDS school. We're also through the Blueprint beginning conversations with universities about teacher preparation and how to ensure that they have all of this that they need to be successful with our students prior to coming. But we do also know that when you come into the teaching profession in whatever role you have, there's a need for ongoing professional development as well and support. So it's really a collaboration and partnership that is being built out through the Blueprint.
Did that answer both your questions? No, people are not raising their hands. Let me. Ms. Dodson?
Yes, I'm glad to see. I know as Ms. Burgess says, the athletic trainers on the list. I'm also happy to see all the ESOL on the list. And I'm very happy to see the special education support on the list. My question is the education support on the list based on the audit we've been undergoing, or is it based on coming into better, I don't want to use the word compliance because I don't think we're out of compliance, but is it to better suit what we have observed outside of the audit, or?
I think it's all of the above. And what I was going to say, what you're seeing here are some common themes. One, the data that we've been presenting for the last couple of years, the visits that you all were able to see firsthand when you go out into the buildings, talking to our staff and talking about the needs that they have, but also seeing it. For example, the interventions that are taking place at Easton Middle School, we were able to talk to the teachers that are giving those interventions to students. So you're seeing that as themes throughout these needs, as well as our 3 priorities. So being able to also tag these needs with either the academics, because we see the data, we see where we have to improve our data, 2, the environment that we're working on, and then 3, being able to provide professional development for our staff so that we can sustain the work that they're doing. So to answer your question, I think it's all of that, Amy.
The 33 total positions, is that a net gain? Are we collapsing any positions? Have we looked that far yet? I don't want to stand up here and be like, yeah, your position's being eliminated, but have we sort of gone through the audit maybe, or has anything come up?
Okay, I have there are a few slides I could have done for tonight that I did not quite get to. So one thing is we have 41 in the low 40s of grant. Let me talk about grant positions because there are a couple of positions on here that are from the 2 social workers from expiring grants and the 1 family navigator. So we had 40 some positions currently, maybe 45 currently funded by grants. 6 of them are on grants that are expiring. 2 of those positions, one of those we were like, it was really an administrator of a grant position, and we thought, we don't need the person in that role. We'll find a different role for that person. Another person, the other ones are sort of rolled into this, into our request. Yeah. And then, like I said, these were our top 33. There were more on the list. So you may have heard from people in your schools, oh, I put in for this or this. These are what we think are the most critical needs. Um, and, there were a couple that we thought, all right, we have a long-term, I think there were 2 that we were like, all right, there's a long-term vacancy. We haven't been able to fill such and such position that's been in the budget for a year or more. We're getting by. Let's take this other request and let's say, okay, we're not going to fill that. We're going to use that money for this other request. So I think there were 1 or 2 that we used to kind of swap out. But yeah.
That ties into my second question, and that is, especially the ESOL positions, do you anticipate them being very difficult to fill? Because I know we've had problems specifically with ESOL in the past, finding people who are qualified and had a desire to do that. And that's, a quarter of the positions we're looking for. Just curious where you think we stand in regards to being able to fill the need that we clearly have.
That's such a good question because just right now, not just exclusive to Talbot County Public Schools, when you look at education on a whole in terms of the recruitment of educators, I think I'm going to be optimistic that we're seeing if, so, for example, if everything was approved. One of the things that I think that, I believe we have to definitely start promoting earlier and just doing the best that we can and doing things that are unconventional, like our on-site career fair that's going to be happening here this week, and inviting some of our local community partners who we know serve some of the individuals in these particular positions. But again, I don't think anything is unique to Talbot County in terms of trying to obtain the best highly qualified individuals for the position. It's just really about recruiting them and also about keeping them here.
I also wanted to add, as I know that you are a big proponent of the athletic trainer position. Yes, I'm happy to see that at the top of the list. I would be in favor of 2, like you spoke of, making sure that we have coverage for all of our athletic events. I know sports parents are they have eyes on that, and so that's important. But I also have been watching legislation for the past 3 or 4 years now, which has yet to pass, but I think it will, requiring athletic trainers, specifically trainers, to be at events. And so I'm sure you all have eyes on that as well. It's nice to be ahead of the curve rather than trying to catch up once that passes and trying to hire from the limited pool that are available. If we were already in place with our people, that would be great.
And that's such a critical point. I know some states are moving towards that, and this would definitely just kind of put us ahead of the game. One of the things that's kind of to your point, even when we have visiting teams, this also supports the teams that come to visit us as well. And I just think it's just critically important to be able to do that, to offer that. And not only are they attending games, but they're also offering the support. Our local orthopedic center has been amazing to help fill in the gaps as we got through this year. So all of those things, those persons stay in constant communication with them, with our families, with our coaches, and so it's definitely beneficial.
Can I ask Dr. Horsey, what are we doing in terms of recruitment on the athletic trainer position? I know you've said that's difficult to find. Are we looking at those in our visits to colleges and things like that as well?
So this was another kind of new moment for me. So one of the things with an athletic trainer, they have to have like a really specialized certification to go along with that. And a lot of our districts across the bridge contract with MedStar and other agencies, so they kind of snatch them up pretty quickly. What I've discovered is that athletic trainers do look for permanent positions and they look for those full-time positions. So sometimes they may contract with someone, but it's more beneficial if they are kind of full-time on your staff. I think that's where you get the better bang for your buck, so to speak.
The clock a little bit and we have a lot of slides to get through. So why don't we jump in and then we can come back with specific questions on Wednesday. These are our 12 categories that MSDE has us sort of departments, if you will. This is how we look at our cost. And there's one new department on here this year, student health. We haven't had that in the past because we have these nurses from the Talbot County Health Department, but you'll see when we get into it that we have some other needs. So first category, administration. This is the Office of the Superintendent, and then all of like the folks sitting at this table, the board expenses, finance, HR, communications. We have an increase of $375,000 in this department. This is, and I'm going to say this a bunch, it includes a salary placeholder. And what I mean by that is it includes a budgeted increase for staff. There are 2 new positions that we just have touched on, that payroll clerk in finance and the certification specialist in HR. We've added some money for one time for a salary or compensation study next year. Dr. Horsey would like to get into, make sure we're being competitive and kind of fits into that recruiting and retention goal that we have. And then some slight increases in legal and auditing fees. Mid-level administration. This is where all of the principals, school administration, and curriculum supervision staff costs are in our budget. So we see increases in salaries and wages, a total increase of $501,000, the majority of it being from salaries and wages. That's that salary placeholder. And then we've added 2 positions from that list to this department. One would be that federal title grants manager, and the other would be that administrator at Easton Elementary to help with special ed specific needs at that school. We did add a little bit of additional money to meetings due to a continued focus on, professional development. That is our focus with our staff and curriculum folks. Instructional salaries. This is where all the wages of our general education teachers, our social workers, our instructional assistants, and our substitutes, as well as stipends and extra pay for extra duty, get recognized. So this budget has one line item, salaries and wages. You see a $1.7 million increase. That is that placeholder. It's, by the way, it's the same increase across basically, all categories, teachers, support staff, everybody. So this is where the majority of our new positions are. So that's really impacting that. We've got those math and reading teachers, or we have an art teacher. We have the 3 ESL teachers, the elementary and secondary ESL coaches, the 3 instructional assistants, 2 for ESL and 1 general instructional assistant, the social workers, the community school staff. And again, there's funding that follows the community school staff and the 2 some of the social workers, that athletic trainer, and the PPW, that's the pupil personnel worker that would be countywide. We did add some money for substitutes. We just are finding that our budget has not kept up with our actual cost for substitutes, and we did increase that scale last year to attract substitutes to actually come work with our kids. Now, there's $270,000 in the budget that we haven't seen in a long time for summer school, because summer school has been paid for the past 5 years out of ESSER funding. And so now it is on our dime. So those costs, the majority of those costs are related to instruction. So those salaries end up in instructional salaries. There are also you'll see some summer school cost in the transportation department.
Really quick before we move on, for substitutes, is that additional money because we are paying more for substitutes or because we're using more hours?
I don't know the answer to that exactly. I suspect it is. I don't know the answer to that. I do know we're paying more. I didn't do a detailed usage estimate times some average rate. I didn't do that. I just kind of looked historically what we've been spending in that category. So I don't know exactly what's driving that. Materials of instruction. So all the direct supplies and materials used in the classrooms with our students to provide curriculum. This is going up $290,000. So there are a couple things in here. Again, we previously used ESSER funding, also LEADS funding. I didn't mention that, to buy some new curriculum. We bought Science of Reading and some things in the past. So we don't have any of that funding to help share the cost, the burden of the cost this year. We do have a couple multi-year renewals, which are big ticket items, over $160,000. And so when we get to a discussion about fund balance, I'm going to make a recommendation that that would be an item that maybe we would use some fund balance to pay for or consider. So, and just to kind of update, make sure we're all on the same page. In the past, we would buy a textbook, and that textbook would last X number of years. And we might buy a few replacement copies, but generally we had a curriculum until the curriculum changed. But that's just not how it is anymore. We buy access to, ELA curriculum. It's online. You have to buy online access. There's ongoing fees, just like, everything in our personal lives. We used to buy it at Staples. We would install it on our computer, one and done. And now everything is online subscriptions. And that's just how education has gone. So there are these recurring ongoing costs. Other instructional costs. So this is everything that it takes to educate our students besides the actual materials that we're delivering to them. So we see some big increases here. What I'll try and do for Wednesday is provide you an analysis of contracted services is where we put cost of software, and land buildings and equipment includes all the hardware, including the devices that we give our students. And what I would like to do is just show you historically over the last couple of years, here's what we spent in a year, here's how much we paid in the local budget versus here's how much was paid by grant funding. So you get an idea of here's what we've been spending in total. I think it would help you understand comparison-wise a little better. But we did add some so there's contracted services in here. So there's some middle school math tutoring that's been going on, and we wanted to bump that up a little bit. National board certification enrollment fees. We were previously covering those for our teachers through a grant that we no longer have. Hardware and software cost, again, those are above 2025. We were using a lot of federal funding to pay for the cost of our system. The athletic trainer contracted cost was in this budget previously, and that's gone very low. It's got like $20,000 in it for a part-time trainer, but it's come down quite a bit. And we wanted to provide some professional development. I spelled teachers wrong. One group of teachers that hasn't really gotten a lot of professional development in their content area in recent years are the fine arts teachers. And so we wanted to provide that for them. And also there's that contracted dance instructor. In special education, this is the cost totally related to our special education students. We spend more in special education than we get in direct special education funding. So we use some of our basic foundation funding to help supplement what we get. This is, by the way, on each of these slides, there's a page number to the left-hand side. This corresponds to the page in the budget book in front of you, if that makes life a little easier. So here we have a change of $750,000, and all of that is really in the salary line item. It's got a new, I think it has, I thought there were multiple, maybe just one instructional assistant and one teacher, and a placeholder for a salary increase. Pupil personnel services or student services. These are, most of our social workers actually are in our instructional salaries budget, but our pupil personnel workers are in this budget. The work that they do is in this budget. So the change here of $73,000, we actually see decreases in several line items because school security was previously in this budget. And so we see that being moved over to Department 10, resulting in some decreases. That just came from a change in school security is moving over to Mr. Schaefer's area. So you see some decreases. And then the increase here is both that salary placeholder as well as the one new position, the supervisor of school counselors. Student health is a new category for us. And so what this looks like for us is we have 2 community schools where we're going to be contracting with the health department to provide some nursing care. In fact, we've already started that this year. At Easton Elementary School, we hired a bilingual nurse. The lines at the in the health room were pretty long, and so nurses are administering meds and a lot of, as well as sick children, a lot throughout the day. So it's helpful to have that additional health department nurse there, and especially helpful to have a bilingual one. So we are paying the health department for that person, and the other benefit of that is by law, when we have after school activities, we have to have nursing at if it's a community school, we have to have a nurse present. And so this allows for some staggering of schedules so that we have that nurse after school for activities. And then we're planning to add another nurse that we would pay the health department for on a part-time basis next year. There's some vision services in there as well at one of our community schools.
You have to have a nurse for the after school, not an EMT.
That is correct. The law is a registered nurse. It cannot be a CNA. Doesn't have to be an EMT. Yeah. It's not, so don't think sports, think more like after school ukulele club, math club, that kind of thing. They still want a nurse. And this kind of ties into, our elementary school, East Elementary School needs assessment didn't necessarily identify nursing, medical care as one of the highest priorities. Although vision services was one thing that they did feel was important to provide. So that is something that's part of the plan. Transportation, all of our bus folks getting our people to and from school, couldn't do it without them. So this includes, this has an increase of $441,000. I want to call your attention to the bottom line here, this increase of $241,000, and explain this a little bit. We buy our buses and we finance them through a lease. It's like a car payment, but it's a bus payment, and it's done through a lease. And it seems like every year what happens is we get to the end of the year and we have a little bit of extra fund balance, and we end up using that fund balance in the current year to pay off some bus leases and prepay the next year's bus payments. So every year when we get to the budget, we look back and we say, oh, there's this huge increase in bus payments. Well, that's really because we've prepaid some of the current year bus payments at the end of the prior year. So this is not us adding a ton of new buses. This is 3 new buses. We follow every 15 years. We are mandated to, under federal law, to replace buses. So we're scheduled to replace 3 next year. These are standard buses. These are not electronic buses. Electronic buses cost more like $1 million, and there are leasing programs and rebate programs, et cetera, et cetera. But for these are just 3 standard buses. So that's that. And those 2 additional bus assistants are in the salaries line item. Operation of plant. This is the operation of our buildings. Bless you. It's our insurance. You see other charges are kind of high in this department. In this department, other charges is primarily all the insurances that we carry for our folks and for our property. Yes, and all good point. All of our utilities costs. So our energy, our yep, that's a good point. Our communications. So Mr. Schaefer, as always, tries to do what he can to keep things pretty flat. The main increases that you're seeing here are related to athletic field equipment, athletic field maintenance, we talked about that. Increasing the frequency of mowing, and some of the supplies we need to bring those fields up to premier condition. Some other things going on here is we have in the equipment line item, let me go back. We have a cost of $165,000, which seems like a big, oh, Lordy have mercy. Okay. Which seems like a big number compared to last year. About $100 and some $1,000 of this is related to a school security safety system that we're looking at. So it's the equipment related to that. And then there's a really similar $120 some $1,000 cost up under contracted services included in this number. That's a big part of the increase for next year. And at a future time, I'm sure Mr. Schaefer will be here to talk to you about that security program. So that is operation of plant. Maintenance of plant is improving buildings and grounds, making repairs. So this department, as you can see, the overall increase is $94,000, and really all of that is coming from salaries, and that's just a placeholder. There were no additional positions in this department, and some of the other line items decreased. Fixed charges or benefits. So this is always, doesn't give you a lot of detail here. The things going into this are our pension cost for our staff, health insurance, other insurances, and FICA and OPEB. For those of you who don't know what OPEB is, other post-employment benefits. It's the health coverage for our retirees. And there is a trust out there we are part of. We're part of the MACO OPEB trust. We contribute money, it gets invested, it makes a return, and we help use that. We will, at some point in the future, we'll use that money to help pay for the accruing medical cost of our retirees. So what makes that different is similar to those bus payments I was talking about. We seldom keep OPEB payments in our budget. We'll put them in the budget, and then when push comes to shove and we need to make some cuts, they come out of the budget, and we'll fund them through some surplus, some savings and vacancies or something like that. So that all comes down to this. This is a summary of each of those 12 categories we just talked about. And so that's just sort of a summary view. You can see that the biggest increase is in the instructional salaries, because that's where the majority of our salaries are, and in fixed charges, because again, along with salaries go benefits. And another reason for the increase in fixed charges, not only are every time our wages go up, all the associated taxes and pension and everything goes up, but it also includes benefits for those new positions. Just a slightly different way of looking at it. This is more by type of expense. So there's that $8.7 million increase by type of expense. So this is a busy schedule. What I want to point out here is the column second from the left. This is our funding for this year. And so by program, most of these are, okay, you have X number of students that qualify for this funding times a per pupil amount, and this is what you get. What I'll find out in a week or so is how much Talbot County is expected to kick in and how much the state is expected to kick in. We get down to this is the number we need to make everything balance. So this is what we would need to ask the county council for over and above what they are required to provide under these blueprint formulas up here. The miscellaneous revenue at the bottom of $1,050,000, the majority of that is interest income and a few other pieces of miscellaneous revenue. And then this $811,150, I don't know if I did a slide on this or not. I didn't. There are a few things going into that. Those, and we can talk about this in more detail at a later point, but there were a few items in the budget that I thought were ripe for using fund balance if this board wants to do that. We have over $6 million in fund balance currently. We don't want to ever use fund balance for things that are ongoing recurring costs. We would want to use it for things that are sort of one-time things, rare things. Those those curriculum pieces that were, big $160,000. I thought would be good to use funding for that. Also, a possibility would be for the school security system. There's something else that I thought might be good to put in there. Oh, the OPEB contribution. Even though we do contribute to that every year, it's somewhat discretionary. So I just thought that would be something we could possibly use fund balance for. So the other thing I just want to it's 8.6 million seems like a really big increase. I recognize that. We all recognize that. But what I want to point out to you is that from a funding standpoint, let me think how to say this. I'm not going to be able to articulate this well. That's our unrestricted portion of our budget. On top of that, we have a lot of grants. So we're expecting to have about $9 to $10 million in grants next year. A lot of that are these title grants. So, but that's a decrease from the prior year of about $5.3 million in grants. So if you factor that in, our total revenue and budget is, we're asking for about 3.5 million more from the local, from Talbot County than we have in the past. And that's really all coming from the fact that we have money in grants that we aren't getting anymore. This is probably too hard to read, but the county requested a multi-year look at our capital requests. So Mr. Schaefer put this together. And looking at this column, the only thing we really have in next year's capital budget is Chapel Elementary and some stadium light conversion at St. Michael's Middle High. We've already done this at Easton High using grant money. So that's really all we're requesting for next year. Some of those Easton Middle School roof replacements are scheduled out a little bit further. Some more HVAC work is scheduled out a little further at Easton High. So you can kind of get a multi-year look. And Mr. Schaefer will be here Friday or Wednesday if you have more questions on that.
I thought we had a more pressing need for HVAC at Easton High based upon the conversation we had and appropriating funds for capital improvements this last capital improvement season. Was that not more pressing?
Right. Again, that'll be a great question for Mr. Schaefer on Wednesday night.
This is unrelated to capital projects. I don't see any mention of Marathon Health in here.
Right. We aren't paying for that. That all was funded through the Maryland Leads Grant and ESSER.
Okay, so it's completely funded, not in here at all. Are we not expecting any revenues from that until, I don't remember the date at which we were supposed to be seeing?
We won't
positive
ever
returns.
get revenue. What we should see is hopefully a cost savings at some point. So we will pay, we negotiated a 5-year fixed price monthly payment. And we should be open in May, 1st of May. Our staff will start using that. And at a certain point, we should start to see enough of a reduction in our healthcare cost, meaning what we're paying out of pocket for prescriptions, for testing, in our Care First bills for payments to, So we should see enough of a reduction that it should offset the monthly cost, if that makes sense.
Okay, so we should start seeing that in our budget when that happens by less of an increase in our health insurance cost. healthcare? Somewhere, where will
Yes,
we
I
see
yes, I
that?
think that's yes, I think that would be the right way to look at it. So we had enough money in the wind down of the Leeds grant and the ESSER grant that I was able to factor in the monthly payments up through at least the middle or beyond I feel I can't remember the exact date of the year next year. So we shouldn't have anything out of pocket, if that makes sense.
Is Mr. Shaver going to be prepared to talk about these items on Wednesday?
Sure.
I captured that question. So that's your
I
answer.
I
also,
mean, I will say this. I don't think, I mean, he can definitely talk about sort of his timeline. I mean, it's hard to know exactly what's going on, 5 years from now, but the county council wanted this longer look, understandably, so they weren't taken by surprise. Um,
I think we asked for this too. I mean,
yeah,
yeah. This is helpful.
yeah.
Just sort of in general, not represented in long-term capital projects. Obviously, is the turf field, which we have
Yeah,
been
and we can
discussing.
put that on there. I mean, this is just tentative. So it is the only thing it is on right there is just the piece that we held back, but we haven't added anything to it. So I'm, totally, in fact, I don't even think this is the right schedule. I'll be honest. I think I made an improvement to this, but at any rate, no. So if the board wants us to set aside money for this for the future, we can do that. We can add that right in. This is just strictly out of what he knew to be necessary improvements.
Okay, well, he definitely presented the HVAC at Easton High as a pressing matter when we were discussing that.
Absolutely. Yep.
So I'm just wondering why it's not in next year's budget if it was in fact a pressing matter.
Part of that had to do with ability to get parts and things like that. I'm trying to think if we. I don't know where that stands. Yeah, I'm sure he'll get back to us on that. This is the last slide. Debt service. So this doesn't flow through our books, but just to make you aware, the county council issues bonds to pay for the construction of our schools and renovation of our schools. I mean, they still have bonds on there from the last time chapel was and St. Michael's were updated in 2015. So this is a cost the county council considers when they're looking at our budget because they know they also have these debt service costs to go along with our budget. That's all I have.
Does anybody have more questions at this time for Mrs. Jones? Know that we'll talk about this again on Wednesday, so you can go home and comb through this, which I assume you all will.
I just have one thought on the athletic directors. If we can't get them, can we think outside of the box and maybe have EMTs from Talbot County at the games so we're at least covered in case there's injuries?
So we do have EMTs at our sporting events, and so that has been really helpful. But I've since learned the difference is an EMT will just stabilize the student or the student athlete and then transport, where an athletic trainer has some more specialized services that will be able to identify some concussions or those broken bones kind of readily, and also able to make some decisions right there on the spot. So that's why it's really important. But we do have our EMTs there on the scene at events, not on the scene. Sorry.
Plus, I think the athletic trainers participate in training and practices, and they're working at preventing, injuries and practicing good technique, etc.
I know Miss Whelan-Cherry and I were having a sidebar over here. Her question was, is there an average amount that the county has given us over the years, every year? Is there a certain average? And I said, that's a great question. I'm in the process of looking back for that 10-year, 15-year trend data. This is just my third year, but I know since coming, we've really started early and being very transparent in our conversations with the council, letting them know, inviting them into our schools so they could see what our needs are. Some people who have been here previously have said it has gotten better from previous years of us working together and getting funding from the council.
One other thing I didn't mention, I should mention because I think this has been a concern. The county council's concern is over our fund balance and how it's accumulated. And I think one of the things I haven't really emphasized or explained enough when we've talked about fund balance, we didn't used to have a fund balance because we didn't used to have access to a lot of grants. And when all the COVID relief money came, all of a sudden we had millions of dollars for things that had previously been in our budget. And so we used the grant money. We're not going to let that go unspent. So we ended up with savings, which is a great thing. So now we have some fund balance, and I feel like that should be viewed positively, not negatively. And I think it protects us in situations where, like this. I mean, we're coming out of it where we have the grants that are not fairly consistent from year to year. But we've shifted. We've been able to add services and supports in our schools through local funding that started in grants. A lot of times, historically over the years, you get grant funding, you start up a program, the grant funding goes away, the position goes away, the work ends. And so we've been able to sustain that. So that's fantastic. But one of the reasons we've had the other thing that's contributed to our accumulation of fund balance is vacancies. And, we're doing what we can on the recruiting and retention side, but, we have savings because we have vacancies. So something we did this year that we have not really done in the past is we did add in a factor for savings from vacancies to sort of reduce the amount of additional of our salary budget. So we looked at our historical vacancy savings from the last 3 years, and based on that, we made some decisions in certain departments and certain types of employee salaries to factor in some savings. And we factored in over $700,000 of savings from vacancies that's reflected in these numbers. So I think that'll be viewed positively by the county council.
One of the things I thought was really and interesting that you all did last year when you made your presentation to the county council was looking at how our budget, how our per pupil expenditures and other types of expenditures, teacher salaries stacked up in comparison to other jurisdictions. And also looking at that, even, thinking of it in the context of test scores so that they had a little bit of context around some of that. So I wondered if we were planning to do that again.
This was a really bare bones without any of the bells and whistles presentation, I'll be honest. So we're going to zhuzh it up a little bit, if that's an okay term. As we go along, it'll get more fun. So yes, we could do that. I will say last year, Mr. Neal and I spent some time and we tried to sort of superimpose test scores by LEA over funding by district, because the one thing that stood out to me initially was Worcester County has these great test scores. They also have a very high funding level, but we found it was very inconsistent, and it didn't tell the story of the more money you put in, the better your test scores are. It was a bit inconsistent. So we did not opt to share that information and just kind of focus on our needs.
But I think that's a good point. And each year we do try to tell our story and the comparison story as well, to what we're doing, how it aligns with our priorities, what we're doing, but also share the celebratory message as well to say, these were our priorities. We put our money behind this, and we're seeing these gains as well.
In regards to one of our district priorities, which is recruitment and retention of staff, we're the only district in the state that doesn't offer a sick bank, I believe. Is that correct? Offer a sick bank to our teachers.
We're definitely
And
one of the few.
I'm assuming there would be some administrative costs if we were to offer something like that. But I think that's something we should consider as a recruitment tool, because if I'm a teacher looking, then that might lean me away from this county.
That would be maybe a good discussion in closed session for because it relates to negotiations. There's some pros and cons.
Anybody else questions for right now? Okay, thank you, Mrs. Jones. We will back up to our data presentation. No, not yet.
While she's flipping back to the slides for our new members, one reason why we have a meeting like this, the work session, which we didn't always have, we used to have all of these presentations done during our Wednesday board meeting. So we have this type of meeting so that you can ask questions, we can spend time on these type of topics, which lend itself to having questions, a little more detail versus packing everything into our Wednesday night session. So that was the reason why we teased out this Monday work session in front of our Wednesday. So hopefully this information you'll be able to this evening, tomorrow, and Wednesday during the day if you have time, and then come Wednesday evening. But before that, don't wait till Wednesday night. Like if there's anything you leave tonight with, please feel free to email me so that we can have that ready also for when. Really quick too, sorry. So also for the new board members, we have been inserting these data reviews and we do them throughout the year. When I came on board July 2022, we had a retreat that next spring in 2023 where we looked at our data. Well, we first identified our priorities, which these 3 priorities you keep hearing, the same 3. We then started looking at data attached to these 3 priorities. And so throughout the year, we continue to come back to talk about where are we with the data as it relates to the 3 priorities. So that's what you're getting ready to see.
So good evening. This evening, Mr. Lee Neild is joining us to begin the presentation. He is a member of our department, and that was a position that Dr. Pipikai really thought about and was able to provide this district. Mr. Neild works with every single department, every school, and often with individual principals and teachers to look at our data so that we can be making informed decisions for our students. I've presented to you many times data, and I always begin or end with acknowledging the work that Mr. Neild puts into creating those data presentations and taking really complex information and making it easier and more actionable for us to put into practice. Mr. Neild is also very respected in our department for being a deep thinker and really seeing things in ways using data that helps us instructionally with our students. Our presentation tonight is going to focus on priority area 2 first, which is our engaging learning environment for students. And Mr. Neild is going to be presenting the local climate survey. That will be the largest part of this presentation because he will be able to give you some specifics as to how it was developed and what our data is telling us. So I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Lee Neild, our Supervisor of Data and Accountability.
So, that discussion shed some light on concerns both locally and that exist across the state as far as being proactive. This ultimately leaves us, because of reporting timelines and when we receive information, it leaves us in a reactionary state. So part of our goal is to come up with some tools and measurements within our district that can keep us working in a proactive fashion. So while working to ensure improvement in state-defined indicators of performance, we've also identified some local priority areas which are in alignment to MSTE's requirements and indicators, but they require regular monitoring of our performance here locally. We also identified areas where there was data lack, and one of those areas wasn't our priority area of school environment and student engagement. And the recognition of insufficient data there has led us to the creation of a local climate survey. The Maryland School Survey is administered once annually between March and April. We don't get the results until the following school year, typically after school has started. And oftentimes that leaves us kind of in a headspin of, what are the results going to be? When our principals and our teachers are back in the buildings at the beginning of the year and they're starting their planning for the school year, there's really not much direction to help improve the climate in the building. So I forgot I was in control of this. So all of that went with this slide, and what you see just kind of paraphrases basically what I just read through. Now, just make sure I'm on the right slide. The Maryland School Survey, again, as I said, it provides students and teachers with 4 choices to items. What we created has been created to mirror the Maryland School Survey. It's a condensed form. The Maryland School Survey has approximately 52 questions for elementary and middle school students, 53 for high school students, and 72 for educators. In all of those questions, it assesses perceptions in 4 domains. We attempted to replicate that survey in a condensed form, not to take up too much instructional time in our buildings, but also gather valuable feedback so that way we could see what perceptions were at certain periods throughout the year. The administration and reporting procedures are very close to what MSDE provides. I went through the technical manual for the Maryland School Survey, and when we were designing our local survey, we attempted to mimic what would take place, so that way the results that we saw here locally, we could begin to project what we might see on the Maryland School Survey. There were some differences. MSDE does provide with a bank of items that they select from every year, but due to security reasons, we can't use those specific items. So when we first began our planning, Ms. Ferrer and Dr. Perfetti and myself sat down and we looked at some sample surveys from different providers. And we went through the items and tried to find items that matched up with items students and educators would see on the Maryland School Survey. So that would protect us from using items where we could potentially get in trouble for security issues. The results, oops, went too far. Survey results are collected through a Likert scale. So each item that a student or teacher answers, they have the option of strongly disagree, agree, strongly agree, or disagree. I think I said all 4, just in the wrong order. Those responses are then converted into a quantitative value and averaged. We did the same thing with our local survey with one exception. We included a neutral opinion in our local surveys rather than forcing a student to choose agree or disagree. Figured neutral would help them feel a little more comfortable with the answers that they were providing rather than putting one and forcing them to feel a little apprehensive about it. It doesn't affect the averages that come out because that neutral opinion is exactly in the middle of what agree and disagree would be for the Maryland School Survey. So now I'm going to move on. And seems to be a couple slides missing, I think, which is okay. Before this slide, I'll leave it up here, you can take a look at it. There was an overall slide, which basically just shows the average values of all students and all educators that responded to the survey. I do have my one-pager, which it's probably not necessary. I'm just going to go over it. The same thing I would do if it was up on the screen, so I'll explain it, but I can certainly make sure that's available if you want to look more closely at the data. So as Dr. Ringhorn mentioned, one of the things that I've tried to do since I've been in the position is take what can sometimes be very confusing and make it easy for people to look at and understand. In doing so, what that oftentimes does is it promotes conversation among people who, in some cases, are very confident in what they see, and in other cases, are not very confident. And by bringing people together with something that they can all understand, the conversation then leads to more positive outcomes. So on this one pager, the first part of this is in purple. I'm not sure if you can see it from our standing, but these are overall results. And what I attempted to do was look at trends of average values from our first administration in the school year 23-24 to the second administration in 23-24, and now we've had our first administration in school year 24-25. And there are some trends that exist, and the trends that show up in the overall area actually look very similar to the trends that you can see across these bars. And just to highlight the main theme in the student results, what we noticed is the first administration has higher values overall. The second administration of the school year drops down. And then our first administration for this school year has another high value. So as you can see under community and each of the topics. So community, environment, relationships, and safety are the 4 domains. The topics that fall within those are respect for diversity, participation and engagement, behavioral and academic supports, physical environment, student-to-student relationships, student-to-staff relationships, physical safety, emotional safety, bullying, and then substance abuse. There was another issue that came up which kind of led us to really dig into this local climate survey, which was the fact that we didn't know what was being asked of students when they were responding to questions in these topic areas. A couple of them kind of they created a little bit of anxiety because we see values, and it's difficult to interpret what they are when you don't know what exactly is being asked. So by having this local survey, we know exactly what the questions are. So when we see the responses that students and educators provide, we can make a little more informed decisions about how to maybe implement some strategies or practices to help work towards improvement. What we're also not able to see are the overall averages for each of the domains. So my goal was to have the overall score of all students who completed the survey and all educators who completed the survey. And then break that down into the 4 domains. And then from the 4 domains, we have the individual topics. So kind of drilling down to a more specific level, because at the overall level, what we would hope to be able to do after some time is begin to make projections as to how our schools will show on their school report cards in the area of the school survey. So as you saw at the December board meeting and Dr. Emmer presented the school report cards, there was a portion of that includes the Maryland School Survey. Now, if we're looking at the topics for students at the top and educators at the bottom, you'll notice that the first administration in 23-24 was higher, then it drops down, and then it goes back up for the first administration. That's the same trend in nearly all areas, but when we look at the next 4 slides after this, we'll actually look at individual questions. And what I would ask is, rather than me reading each question, kind of look for outliers in those trends. The staff trends almost all look the same. They have been steadily increasing through each administration that we've provided. So again, I would ask you to look at any outliers there, because those outliers, while sometimes may not be the most positive result, it is probably the most informative. That gives us directions where we can narrow down our focus and really begin to zero in on what actions or strategies we could discuss in each of the buildings that would create a more positive environment for both our students and our staff. Are there any questions about this? Yes.
Could you explain what your numbers mean there? So if it's a 4.87, is that out of what?
And that's one of the slides that's missing. If you could view a continuum from 1 to 10, or if somebody were to ask you to rate something on a scale of 1 to 10, that's kind of how we look at this. 1 would be the lowest rating or the least favorable response, and a 10 would be the most favorable response. So when MSDE has their scale converted to a quantitative value, each of the selections, whether it be strongly disagree, is assigned a point value. Strongly agree would be the highest point value. So each student response is converted to a number, and then those numbers are then averaged for an overall score. That's identical to what is shown here. So when we look at, let's say, physical environment, school year 24-1, the number in that bar is 5.02. So but on a scale of 1 to 10, 5.02 would be, in my opinion, a somewhat neutral perspective in that area. So each scale on these graphs are different. They've been changed just to kind of emphasize increases or decreases. So rather than having a scale on the horizontal axis of 1 to 10, they have been adjusted so that way we can see a more defined improvement or decline. Again, that doesn't always give us a favorable position to discuss the results, but it is probably the most beneficial because even if it's not good, it's an area that we need to focus on. And if it can be easily overlooked, we may not focus on it to the extent that we should. So again, just to kind of circle back, those values are just the average rating between 1 and 10, with 10 being the most favorable response and 1 being the least favorable. You'll notice, and this is just before I move on, underneath of safety, those bars, or that bar chart, is turned vertically compared to these that are horizontal. That is intentional to a certain respect. That domain and those topics only have one question asked of students or educators on the survey, so those results are the actual specific question results. Whereas each of the other topics and domains have multiple questions in each area. You'll also notice under relationships for educators, the Maryland School Survey does not include a topic of staff-to-staff relationships, but that was something we thought was valuable to assess in our schools because if our staff aren't happy with the people that they're working with or they have differences of opinions, that contributes to the overall climate. So that is not one that is on the Maryland School Survey, but we thought that it was beneficial for us to track those measurements or those results.
Can you refresh my memory as to what that one question under safety, how that reads?
So the specific question itself. So on the next 4 slides, you'll see the exact questions that were asked.
Thank you.
Yep. And I didn't want to put them all up there with too much information at one time. Sometimes they can become overwhelming. And I'm actually going to break it down into each domain. So green is our community domain. On the left here, we have our student results. On the right, we have our educator results. And then the questions are turned vertically. I apologize. When I created my one-pager, that was the easiest way to fit them on there. So I could do this, but unfortunately, you have to do this. So again, I wasn't going to read the questions, but what I would like for you to look for, just to refresh your memory on what I explained, are noticeable trends in student results. We have a high value for the first administration, it drops down, and it goes back up. For educators, we have a continual improvement for the most part, and the outliers that you'll probably recognize are when you don't see that pattern. So under community, we can see that trend in all of the student results. SY24-1 is a higher value, then it drops down, and then we see for SY25-1, it's even higher than the first administration of the previous school year. Educators typically trend upward so far is what we've noticed, but there is one outlier over there, and that is under CPE 2, participation and engagement. So if you notice something that kind of looks out of place, again, when we get you these results, you can look at the question specifically, or you can read it sideways there, but that last one is school staff promote the success of all students. And that is the staff's perception of how staff promote success to students. So I would think, and this is my opinion, that they respond based on how they see other staff in the building interact with students regarding successful completion of their learning objectives. The next domain and topics are surrounding environment, and we have behavioral and academic supports and physical environment. So again, you can see the similar trend under the student results, high, low, high, and then staff. You see a little fluctuations. The outliers there would be under the behavioral and academic supports. Again, when we look for these trends or patterns, it's not so much as informative information as it is trying to identify where we might need to focus our attention. And those outliers and the trends or patterns that we see in the data is where we would then dig further in. Yes?
Kind of looks like, though, those numbers are lower. They might be numbers that you would hope to see be lower. Such as I spend too much of my time teaching time on disciplining students. You'd actually hope that number would go down, right?
And that's something that I would hope that somebody would ask. So when there's a question that somebody were to mark strongly agree, so strongly agree in this case would not be a favorable response. So because I collect all of this data, analyze it, convert it, on items where a strongly agree was actually unfavorable, the quantitative value assigned to that qualitative response is actually flipped. So a strongly agree for that question, rather than assigning a 10, I assigned a 1. So that way when you look at this, 10 is favorable, not necessarily strongly agree, but it's a favorable response. So a high value for a question like that was actually strongly disagree.
I have a comment, and I'm not sure this is not directly about the data. It's about how we respond to the data. And I hear what you're saying, that we're looking for outliers and that's where we'll focus. But I'm also looking at these actual numbers, and they're all on the negative end of things. So if we're looking at, these are 4s, 5s, so we're negative neutral. And to me, yes, I understand that you want to watch the data. I'm a data person, I like to watch it, but still this data is telling me that in general our students and educators don't feel positively about all of this. And so I would, rather than looking for specific nuances in the data, I would say, well, this is an area we need to focus on, rather than watching for an outlier. Does that make sense?
You're exactly right. I'm nodding my head in agreement because truthfully, part of my job oftentimes involves having conversations about data that's not necessarily favorable. And if we look at everything that is positive only, we won't make a whole lot of change. I view all of this as areas for improvement, but when we look at our priority areas and school improvement, we have to start somewhere. And when we look at the domains and the topics, there are some that are much lower. That to me would be a place to start. They all need improvement because we want to continually improve, obviously, our school climate for students and staff.
Okay, so just to reiterate, we're looking for areas where they come in low and areas of not following the pattern. Okay.
And I only mention the pattern for sake of this conversation because when I see trends in the numbers, if we're trending upward, that means we're making improvements. What we have in place already is making improvement. It's not always at the rate that we would hope to see. But I asked to look for those outliers because they kind of defy what we're seeing in all of the other data. And if it's not, we're not seeing similar trends in all of the data, then there's something specific in that area that we probably need to address, with a sense of urgency. I completely agree that, our numbers are primarily in the middle to the low end, which is not, highly favorable. But if we can see evidence from our Maryland School Survey where we have a specific rating, then our local survey is somewhat higher, and then our next local survey is somewhat higher, we're making those small steps to improving. And change is not instant, especially in our buildings with students. But by looking at these outliers and looking at the small changes that are making, it's justification for our staff and our principals and administration in our buildings that some of the actions they're taking are improving perceptions of the environment. And again, we have to recognize and validate the work that's being done and continue to motivate to push forward. And when we see something that's not improving, what is it that's not improving? And we have the ability to drill down to school in this data in keeping our anonymity fairly high. We aren't able to track information specific to student groups or anything like that, but we can narrow it down to grade and school. So, for sake of time, I'm going to move forward unless anybody has any questions about this domain and topics. This is relationships. Similar trends, just not as much difference. As you can see again, while our numbers may not be in that favorable end of the spectrum, they're in the unfavorable to neutral area. We are seeing that trending upward for the most part, and that's what we would hope to see. Again, the scales are different, so what looks like the same size bar on one compared to the same size bar on another might have different numerical values, but at first glance, we're looking for that trend. When we dig in, we look at those numbers, as you mentioned. And then the last is safety. And I completely got away from my script. So this one. And that's what I can do. I can talk about it when I work with all the time. But this is an area where we see the normal trends that I've shared under educators, but this is the first time where there's some outliers in the student trends. So again, the student trends were high, low, high, but in this case we see some that are just trending downward. Again, the values are not favorable, but also the outlier in trending is not really favorable. But this is the first flag that we look at because that's the most alarming to us is when we see something that's not changing the same as everything else. And again, the questions are across the bottom. And this is another example, for example, under student results, safety, substance abuse. This is one of those items where I strongly agree is not a favorable response, so it's been flipped. Again, with the Maryland School Survey and not knowing exactly what items, when we see those values, we're not sure how to interpret the results, but we know exactly how to interpret this, and we have a starting point for how to address it. Questions about safety? This goes in with our school environment and student engagement priority area. But we know that with this, and as mentioned in the December meeting, one of the concern areas was chronic absenteeism. So our student attendance rates doesn't necessarily point out to anything as far as chronic absenteeism, but we know student attendance and school climate kind of go hand in hand. For many students, there is a correlation between the two. So within this priority area, we're monitoring our local survey and also our attendance in a regular fashion. And this is a comparison of the first 4 months of school over the past 2 years. The scale of this does show a considerable difference for some months, but when you look at the values of the labels of each bar, they're not considerable changes, but they are things that we need to look at and consider as to why it might be higher or it might be lower.
Do we have any way to correlate the absences? This is probably, the answer is probably no, but do we have a way to correlate them specifically to illnesses or excused by doctors?
We have data available that shows the coding for every absence associated with a student. So we can look back at students. And I may be speaking out of place, but one of, we do have a program that now compiles some of our data together so we can look for trends. It makes it a little bit easier for analysis. But we can also see, throughout the course of a year, how many absences a student had for a doctor's note, or an unexcused absence, or a field trip, or so there's like, I don't know, probably 50 or 60 attendance codes that are entered in. It's not just absent or present.
If a student is suspended or expelled, are they marked as absent?
Yes, that's an absence.
But an in-school suspension is marked as not absent?
No, those students would be marked present.
Okay, and I'm curious, I don't know if you can share this with us, but I'm curious if that has a measurable impact on our attendance rates, if we have more or fewer suspensions that factor into this. Are we looking at more suspensions or more illness or more just unexcused? We don't know. Back to Ms. Dodson's question about, the coding of absences.
Right. So we would have to take a deeper dive into the data to look at the reasons for the absences. But yes, because suspensions do count as absences, they're going to factor into the attendance rates.
I think I'm wondering if we have more sick kids this year versus more kids who've been suspended, and that actually would trend positively in my mind. You know, fewer discipline referrals. I don't want everybody to be sick, but I know that pneumonia went around and everybody had it this year, and so I'm wondering if that's reflected in this versus, or do we have more suspension? You know, kind of what are the reasons for the absences would be important to me.
Right. And we can certainly pull that data and have that for you.
I'd be really curious to see that, especially since attendance factors in so heavily into our school star ratings.
And I think the challenge with the star ratings and the attendance piece is that it looks at that chronic absenteeism, right? And so chronic absenteeism is absence for any reason at all, even the excused absences. So that's one challenge. The other challenge is that's a really fluid number. So if you looked at that rate at this point in time, it could be a very different rate 2 months from now because it's 10% of the students' enrollment and they have to be enrolled for at least 10 days. And so you could have a student who meets the threshold right now and then doesn't have any absences and will be enrolled for a longer period of time. And 2 months from now, they're going to come off of that chronic absentee. So really looking at that number is probably better to do toward the end of the year. Having said that, we certainly look at students who are trending in that direction, and we do a variety of interventions for students who are trending toward that status of chronic absenteeism. Makes sense.
The chronic absenteeism that's factored into the Maryland School Report Card is collected in the end-of-year attendance file that's submitted by Talbot County. So we have the ability to monitor students who are trending chronically absent based off of their days of enrollment compared to their absences. And if they are students who have comparative attendance from previous years, that would be a pretty solid indicator that any attendance interventions that we have available might need to be put in place. But as she mentioned, a student arrives here and enrolls in Talbot County Public Schools, and they're here for 2 days, and then their family needs to go back home and move all of their belongings. Their attendance while enrolled is being calculated.
And we do monitor students when we are looking at attendance. We start in first grade looking to see if do they meet the threshold for trending possibly towards chronic absenteeism, and then we monitor that every marking period that they're enrolled with us starting in first grade, so we can start to see a pattern with students over time if that's a chronic problem.
A couple things that I wanted to mention. One, that's why there's conversations with the Maryland report card changing because of some of the factors that they have that weigh in that give the school the points are just like Ms. Spurrier said. I mean, the attendance, which in many cases we don't have control of, shouldn't be a hindrance and a mark against the school. So that's the first thing. The second thing, what Mr. Neal said, and he truly is data extraordinaire. I love looking at data and I can get really caught down in the weeds, but I was just down in his office today. You really didn't need a script because he does this all the time. So he could just talk off the cuff and really make it easy to understand. But we have programs now, data insights, that can monitor, just like Ms. Spurrier said, attendance, grades, discipline. So every marking period, we could see the numbers. And then with the program, like if we were to click in December 91.8, and I'm just using this as an example, the percentage, we could click that and then be able to see all the students. So you can look now, we have programs that we can now look at the specifics. And even with all of the school climate data that we wanted to do ourselves internally because we were getting the state so far, out of timeline, all the time every month, principals are meeting with Mr. Neal. And because that's just step one, just being able to look at it is step one, really. The work really comes in with asking these questions. We see this going up, or we see this number. What does that mean? Going back to the teams, talking to students, taking this data to my student advisory groups to say, hey, this is what it's looking like. What are you all seeing yourselves? So it's taking just the data now that we're looking at and then taking it to the table and having those rich conversations and the discussions. And so thank you, Mr. Neal, for that, because this is his work. He does this. He makes it really easy to digest. So then we could take it back and then do the work and implement for the changes to take place.
Do we have a student dashboard where they have the grades and so we can monitor that?
So that a student, so you're saying a student's name and then you see their grades? Oh, yeah. Yep.
You mentioned, there are 3 areas that it focuses on. We have academics, attendance, and discipline. And in the academics, we can analyze performance by subject area. So we have our core subject areas, and it will tell us the number of A's, B's, C's, D's, F's for each quarter or by the week of the year for comparison. So for example, and I don't know off the top of my head because the past 3 weeks have really confused me. But I could speak to, let's just say week 17, because when Dr. Pepkai was in the office earlier, that was something that I noticed. So we can look at results as of quarter 1 or as of the current week of the year and compare it to previous years. In that, if we were looking at mathematics, and we click on the bar for students who earned a C in quarter 1, if I click on that bar, it then drills down to a list of students. And I can see all of the students who earned a C in that subject. I can then click on a specific student and it will show me their historical grades for that subject. So all of this data lives in our student information system. This product is just something that uses, and I hesitate to draw too much attention to it, but they rely on artificial intelligence to pull that data into a prompting software program that shows you more precisely what you're looking for, rather than having to follow a click path of 37 clicks and 3 pages. It's all right there to look at.
I have a question. I have a quick question. The discipline, is that the number of referrals students have had in their files? Or what do you mean by the discipline?
So the discipline data can be looked at a couple different ways. You have infractions, but you also have log entries, which would be referrals that are written by administrators, or submitted by administrators if they're written by another staff member. And Ms. Berger might be able to get to that.
Right, so when we look at discipline, we look at referrals, we look at the consequences, we look at the location of the offense, the day of the week, the time. So we can look at all of that data. For the state's purposes, they're looking at out-of-school suspensions. Out-of-school suspensions. That's when they start to look at our discipline data, that's what they're looking at.
That's a mark against, right? If you get out of school suspensions, that's when the state looks at it.
Well, I think we look at that data in a lot of different ways, right? So, I mean, we want to have our out-of-school suspensions. We want to look at for alternatives to suspensions because we know that suspensions don't change behavior. So, I mean, I don't know that I would say it's a dig, but we do want to look at that data and be mindful of it and look for ways to do alternatives to suspensions if we can. We submit out of school suspensions. That's what we look at. We don't really do in-school suspensions because we have our Checkmate In program for students and they don't count as in-school suspensions. So if we provide services to students when they're in Checkmate In, they don't have to under the definition in Maryland. So
Wanted to say thank you for all of this. This was great. It's great to see that you are being proactive and doing this survey locally in such a way that it can be used proactively and for planning purposes. So thank you.
Ms. Juris, because Mr. Neild has really put a great deal of thought into it, as he does with all of our data. And that's the reason why we thought it was important for him to be here tonight and to make that the largest part of our presentation to give a context for what that survey is. I'm going to move on to some academic data, And I promise you, I'm going to be very brief in comparison to how I normally present data to you. And by the time I get to the end of my presentation, you'll understand why. So student academic success is really at the core of our work. We know that we have to have welcoming environments. We have to have students coming to school. And our work is to make sure that each student is reaching their potential academically. So tonight I'm going to be sharing with you two measures that we use to monitor student progress, MAP growth and DIBELS. These measures are administered, 3 times a year, which allows us to make informed decisions in real time regarding instructional adjustments or interventions for students so that we're making sure that we're improving outcomes for student grade level mastery of the standards. I know I presented on our MCAP data, and as Mr. Neal said, that comes after the fact, so we are trying to be proactive with these measures. On this slide, which has a lot of information on it, you see a high-level summary of these two assessments. It shows a comparison of the percentage of students who were assessed at the beginning of the year within each of the levels where they performed, and it's in comparison to last year's beginning of year. Again, this is a high-level overview of the data. This is a starting point, and then we start drilling down deeper and deeper into the data to inform instruction. So MAP growth is a nationally normed standardized achievement test, and it measures what students know, and it also informs what they're ready to learn. So this is actionable information for our teachers who are working with students in classrooms right now. Our teachers use the results to better understand individual student needs. There are individual student reports that the teacher looks at in order to help the student make progress. Because the assessment is a growth measure, it can track growth of the student between testing events, so when we assess them 3 times a year, and also over multiple years as we continue our practice of implementing this assessment. This slide is specific to the MAP English Language Arts Fall Administration, which we call Beginning of Year, BOY. The data is presented by grade level, and you can see it was administered in grades 1 through 8. The percentage of students in each grade, which is along the bottom, it shows the performance level by percentage. And you'll notice that grades 1, 6, 7, and 8 do not have a comparison to last year. That is because this is the first school year that we are administering the assessment in those grades. So this slide is specific to the MAP Mathematics Fall Administration, again, the beginning of year. The data is presented in the same way as the English Language Arts. In this case, we assess students in grades kindergarten through 8th grade. And the percentage of students at each grade in each one of the performance levels is displayed on this chart. You'll notice on this one that grades 7 and 8 do not have a comparison to last year. And again, that's because we're continuing to build out the assessment for our students, so we now have a more comprehensive view. And then this one is a display of DIBELS, which stands for Dynamic Indicators of Basic Early Literacy Skills. And it assesses our students' acquisition of literacy. It includes short fluency measures that can be used to detect risk and also monitor the development of early literacy reading skills. It's what we use, DIBELS, to screen all of our students as we're required to do by Senate Bill 734. This legislation requires that we screen all of our students, K-3, and that we notify parents if their child is at risk for reading difficulties. And not only that, but that we also share with parents what intervention we're putting in place for their child, specifically if we do detect using DIBELS that they might have a reading difficulty. This provides a comparison, again, for consistency's sake in our data tonight, of beginning of year administration for this year to last year's school year. And I'm not delving too deeply into the data tonight because we're just now completing the mid-year administration and analyzing that data. And what we have found that comparing mid-year to the beginning of the year is actually a more valuable data piece for us because it's comparing the same student and how much growth we're making now. Rather than a year-to-year comparison, which is different students, and it's not actually showing the growth from one administration to the next. We did want to include these measures tonight to indicate to you that this is just two assessments. These are just two assessments that we use to continually progress monitor for our students. And in our next data dig, I will be able to provide you more detailed information regarding the growth our students are making based on the actions our teachers are taking right now for those students. But again, high-level overview to set a context for our next data dig when we move forward.
Dr. Arnhor, remind me when we get that next set of data points.
It should be relatively soon. We started the mid-year prior to the winter break. Again, there's always some students we need to catch up, and with the long break here, it's taking us a little bit longer. And then it does take a little while because we do the assessment, the analyzing behind the scenes as well. But those will be coming out shortly. I do want to preface by saying that DIBELS has not yet been administered. We do that closer to the end of January, but the MAP second administration is almost complete.
I appreciate seeing the data, the good, the bad, the ugly, everything in between. And I very much appreciate seeing some alarming data points on this that tie directly back to budget requests for this year, as you said, but we would, and we did. And I, right off the bat, speaking to those middle school math and ELA coaches, you can see the need for that. And so, and that ties back into the presentation that we will make to County Council about our budget. I think you can all tie it in very nicely. It doesn't always get action on immediately. Like Mr. Neal was saying, things move a little bit slower than I think everybody would like them to. But yeah, there's definite high level connections here, which are easy for me to see. So hopefully easy for somebody on the County Council to see as well.
Have you noticed any changes with the new math curriculum?
So I was just going to speak to that piece and remind the board that we have implemented new elementary reading curriculum using the LEADS grant, and we also have new math curriculum and resources for our teachers to use that we were able to purchase through the ESSER funding, so all grant funded when we're thinking about budget. And as I often say, change is slow. So I don't anticipate we're going to see a huge increase right away just because we put in some new resources for our teachers. They are working very diligently to learn the new resources, the new curriculum. I've heard from them that it's much more demanding on our students, which we know needs to be in place in order to help them meet that proficiency. So do I think we will see results? Absolutely. I think the patience and the diligence and the continuing to add in is what's going to make the difference.
So the last portion of our priorities, so we talked about the academics, we talked about the learning environment for students and staff, or engaging environment rather for students and staff. The last piece of our priorities is our hiring practices and sustainability of our staff. And so Dr. Horsey will cover that.
Good evening, everyone, again. So So one of the things that has been really important in the Human Resources Department this year is just really making sure that we are being really intentional about our plan for hiring, recruiting, and retaining. Um, So if you'll see here, and this is some information that I'll share before, if we look back at the 23-24 school year, based on schools, these were the hires in these particular schools. You'll notice one of the things that I want to call attention to is sometimes these are individuals that are leaving our school district, and sometimes this is a combination of teachers that have retired. And so if you'll look at this year, I was really intentional. Our team was really intentional about making sure you understood some of those clarifications. So sometimes it's internal transfers. Sometimes people want to go to a different grade level. Sometimes people retire. But I think it's important to capture those experiences in our hiring practices. And I will get this clicker right before the end of the night. And that came out. I'm not sure why that slide. But anyway, one of the things that I wanted to call attention to, because in our plan we talk about diversity, the number of hires that we have around diversity in these particular groups. I wanted to just really lift up some things that are going to be happening relatively soon. So how we capture if teachers are going to be returning, retiring, we're going to be sending out intent forms to all of our TCPS employees on Wednesday. That information will also go out, and also capturing early those individuals that are interested in retiring. One of the things that happens when we have individuals leave our district, specifically teachers, is that I conduct exit interviews with them to get some feedback. So one of the things that came up in one of the interviews most recently, a teacher that recently left us had indicated the things that would be really helpful is to have some check-ins for those that are here in that 2 to 3 year experience with us, and that's what we plan on doing, because being able to touch base with them more frequently, because our mentor program is so strong on the top end, is to be able to have some supports built in as they continue along the journey with us. Ms. Yanikis and myself, we went around to every school before the Christmas break to talk about the new licensing and regulations that are coming out from MSDE. We are also going to be releasing our senior teacher waiver. That was really important for our teachers here in Talbot County Public Schools. And so when you talk about a retention tool and keeping people kind of satisfied at what we do, that was a big piece for them. And Dr. Pepikai has endorsed that. And that does require the endorsement of their superintendent. Upcoming 2 job fairs, we are going to be going to College Park. College Park has a pretty big job fair that includes local school districts around the state, as well as Middletown, Delaware. We really looked at where we would be going, and also Mr. Beck keeps a really active chart about on the number of recruits and the number of people that he interacts with. And so we changed it a little bit based upon those numbers. So for example, if we go down close to the beach, we know we're not probably going to yield as many people as the people that are at the beach. So I just lifted up our current openings in our district. And that's what we are advertising currently, which speaks to our career fair that we're going to be having here on site on Thursday evening from 4 to 7 p.m. And that's just the flyer that goes along with that. One of the things that I want to call attention to, we initially, right before Christmas, we had 3 National Board Certified teachers, and now we're up to 15. Just wanted to lift up the number of certified teachers and including our certified school leaders, supervisors, and everything incumbent here in Talbot County. And again, we want you to say yes to TCPS.
Dr. Garcia, I just want to commend you for the improvements you're making in the HR department. You came in with a lot of work to do, and I see you doing it, and I just really appreciate what you're doing in that area.
Well, I appreciate that, but it's definitely a team approach. One of the things that I say about human resources, everything that was presented tonight, all of the people from our budget to our data, everything, it's about the human side of the work that we do. So it's just not me. It's a really a team approach, honestly.
Any questions for Dr. Horsey? No? Anything for Dr. Einhorn that you missed? No? Okay. And that was the end of that presentation, correct? Wow. All right. And I think that's it for this evening, unless Dr. P wanted to add anything.
No, just to piggyback off what Dr. Horsey said, just the team approach, looking at all the TCPS staff here in this room. We have our 3 priorities that are led by, Dr. Einhorn, Ms. Spurrier, Dr. Horsey, Ms. Jones, who does our budget. The backdrop of all of that has to be communicated, and that's Ms. Gardner, Ms. Claggett, who do the slides. Everybody, Faith there that's keeping everybody straight. We have Mr. Wilson and the tech team. And then, of course, Mr. Neal in the backdrop doing all the data. So I just have to reiterate the team approach that we have here. And we just like to add more people to the team. So make sure you come out Thursday, those interested, to our career fair this Thursday. So that's all I have to say.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody who presented this evening. Really, really informative. We're moving in the right direction. It's great to see. And we will go ahead and adjourn this meeting and see you all back here on Wednesday. Thank you very much, everybody.